Welcome to a new edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. I'm your host for tonight, Jeremiah Preisser. How you folks doing? Good. Yep. Glad. Yep. Happy for the response. Anyways, we are brought to you by betnow.eu. Click on the banner, go to the website, use Truth50 as your promo code. You get a little something back if you do some betting. They're also brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation with Jackie Richardson and Alex Ramos. Again, fighters do not have 401k plans, so if you can chip in, it would be much appreciated. Not so much on my part, but for their part. Again, these guys live a tough existence. It's tough. It's unlike other sports. You just don't have the protections that you do in the NFL, MLB, NBA, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, let's move on. It's going to be a short episode, of course. We're entering into the slow season. But it's a bit more active than it is in most years because everybody's still putting together, their year-end lists. I saw that Boxing Scene had just put out a few. Looks like they had gone a different way than a lot of other people, at least in terms of Fight of the Year. I think they had Golovkin and Derevyanchenko. And I also think with Knockout of the Year, they had, who was it? Uniel Dorticos versus knocking out Andrew Tabiti, which I thought was an excellent choice. It's not that it's not that I'm praising it solely because it was a little bit different from where other people are going, just because I think there weren't really any runaway candidates for any of those. I think Canelo was pretty clearly the fighter of the year, but again, it's not that big of a deal. I don't think we should argue too much over it. Anyways, let's move on to the first bit of news that I saw, and it was Andy Ruiz Jr. being talked about by Eddie Hearn, possibly fighting Alexander Povetkin or Dillian Whyte. And I think those are both, they're both damn good styles matchups. I really do. Ruiz has got fast hands. He's a good offensive fighter. We saw what he can do in the first Joshua fight. If you let him move his hands, you get in his wheelhouse. He's got good power, quick hands. His accuracy seems to be pretty good. He's got a pretty good jab when he utilizes it. Actually, I think that was one of the least talked about items in his grab bag in the first fight, and that was his jab to the body. I thought it was excellent. I thought that was one of the things that helped open up Anthony Joshua upstairs. And again, it just seems like the jab kind of gets a little less credit than it should overall. There are plenty of fights that I can point to here, and some people act as if it doesn't count as much as it should. Anyways, Ruiz is a damn good offensive fighter. Whyte is as well. Povetkin, even at this age, I still think is he's obviously a top 10 level guy. So I wouldn't have any problem with those. Eddie Hearn, to his credit, has been doing a damn good job of matching these heavyweight guys. We've seen a good number of quality heavyweight bouts because of the styles. Think about it, in the last 3 years, how many good heavyweight fights we've gotten. And again, these aren't classics, but there are some interesting ones. Parker Whyte, right? Whyte was damn near out of it in the 12th round. That was a good one. Whyte, Chisora, of course. There's been a number of them. Actually, Povetkin versus Hunter was pretty good. Whyte or Joshua versus Ruiz, the first one, that was a fun one as well. A lot of people have it. It's easily the upset of the year, but there's been a good number of quality matches that have been made, and I've got to credit Eddie Hearn. I think if he goes in either one of these directions, I think it's rock solid. The only thing about Dillian Whyte being chosen, however, is it would seem as if Whyte might play it a little bit safer. And again, I'm not encouraging this. Of course, anybody who listens to this show knows that I'm a proponent of the best fighting the best. Get on with it. Let's get it done. All this, waiting. It's horrible. God, it's horrible. All you got to do is point to Mayweather and Pacquiao as a prime example of what boxing is capable of. We're talking about a fight that was, half a decade or more too late. That shouldn't even happen. Golovkin, again, he's got a do what he can for 4 years as the number one ranked contender before he finally gets Canelo. I mean, it's nonsense, man. There are just too many examples of this. Rigondeaux being shut out at 122, not fight Leo Santa Cruz, Carl Frampton. I've used these examples in the past. Again, anybody who's aware, who listens to this regularly knows that I've used some of these examples in the past, but it's just horrible. But Eddie Hearn in recent years has been doing a good job of pairing these guys, getting fun fights done, and I think either one of these matchups is another example of that. Ruiz, he says that he's going to show up motivated from here on out. You can tell that he's a bit disappointed in his performance, just as we all are. I mean, he shit the can there. He showed up too heavy. And let's not attribute all of it to his weight gain. It's not. I mean, even if he had shown up even if he had lost 10 pounds, is he really catching Anthony Joshua? I don't care where you fall in that assessment. The fact is that it's not all. It's not all Anthony. It's not all Andy Ruiz. It's not all his doing. But if he's paired with Povetkin, who I think is still a serviceable pro, he's a professional inside and outside the ring. I mean, again, he doesn't get enough credit. I've talked about this before, but this guy's on the plus side of 40, but it seems like he shows up, each and every time out in rock solid shape. He's not cut. He doesn't look like a bodybuilder or anything, but, just because he stays in shape, I don't know about year round, but it seems like it. I do follow him on social media. He seems like he stays pretty close to shape often. And then you have Dillian Whyte, who obviously would show up in better shape than he did against, Vok. So, yeah, either one of those are great. I'm all for it. I think if I was Eddie Hearn, I'd probably pair him with Povetkin, who seems right for the taking. Povetkin he's gotten just, after the Joshua, he just feels like he's right there. Like all you got to do, you have to make him feel his age. You have to give him a reason to want to hang him up. And guys like Hunter and these others, they're just not, Huey Fury, they're just not doing it. Right. But it feels like it. It feels like Povetkin is right there. Somebody just needs to give him the incentive to give it up. And, Ruiz might be that guy, though, of course, Povetkin is crafty. He's got a lot of nuance to his game. You don't win a gold medal in the Olympics without it. Actually, I watched part of his fight against, how do you say it? The silver medal, the match to advance into the finals in the Olympics. I watched part of it today because I actually saw a picture with Povetkin and Ali together. Of course, they weren't shaking hands or getting to know one another. They just happened to be caught in the same photo. And, so I decided to watch a little bit of Ali and his gold medal match, because they're both gold medal winners. Not comparing them much outside of that, but, Ali fought Cassius Clay as he was back then, fought the Polish guy. I'm not even going to attempt his name. I think it was Peter. Again, I'm not going to go there. And then, unfortunately, Alexander Povetkin won his gold medal because the Egyptian, who was supposed to be there, he bowed out with an injury. But he fought the Italian Camarella. How do you say that? Camella. I'm not sure if I'm getting that right. But, the Italians have typically produced rock-solid heavyweight amateurs, throughout the years. And, Povetkin beat his pretty clearly. I think he would have won the gold medal match regardless. You don't really see a lot of top-notch. You do see some good amateur boxers from Egypt, but, they typically don't make it they typically don't advance to the gold medals. I mean, usually they don't win medals at all. But I saw both guys fight, and Povetkin was just better. Anyways, I think Ruiz against either one of those guys is quality. I think in any one of those guys can win too. And the thing about Povetkin being paired, I think, is safer because no matter who wins that fight, the expectation is going to be for Ruiz to win that fight, of course. But if Povetkin takes it, it's not. I don't think it's too much sweat off Eddie Hearn's brow because it's. I don't think he has a ton invested in Andy Ruiz. I mean, he's still got a name. Maybe they can get a third fight in the future with Anthony Joshua. I just don't think there's a lot of interest in that right now. So it's not that important. Whyte, however, if I was Whyte, the thing about Whyte is, again, I don't want to see him play it a bit safer, but if he really wants that fight with Deontay Wilder, and I know he's been chasing it forever, Ruiz is a pretty big risk there. Then on the flip side, however, and the side that I have a tendency to favor, is just take the tough fights. I mean, even if he gets knocked off, if he gets knocked out by Andy Ruiz, is it really that big of a deal? I don't think it should be. But the thing about Whyte, too, is he kind of feels like Povetkin in a way. Of course, the context is different. Whyte is, still, in his physical prime. He's good. But it feels like with Whyte that he's also on the verge of getting knocked off as well. I mean, he's been performing admirably. When he shows up in shape, he's good. He's nothing special, of course. I don't think many of these heavyweights are anything special, but it just feels like he's close. Like you watch the Parker fight, he was so close to being stopped. So again, Ruiz could be that guy, and it just seems like if you were a matchmaker, if you were a promoter, you'd want to go with Povetkin, right? It just seems like the safer route. Either way, I'm perfectly fine with it. I mean, it's a good fight regardless. Hell, I wouldn't mind if you put together another big card like they did with the Ruiz Joshua too, and just put a bunch of heavyweight fights on. I don't know, put Chisora Povetkin or something. There are plenty of ways to make good fights. Chisora Parker, I don't know. Maybe one of them, maybe Chisora's fight Usyk instead. Anyways, let's move on to another suggestion by Eddie Hearn, and that was Boatsy, maybe I'm saying that wrong too, versus Callum Johnson. I think that's a damn good step-up fight. I think it's worth making. Boatsy looks good. He appears maybe to be more talented than Anthony Yarde. He doesn't seem to have that much power. And I'm not talking about overall, of course. I'm not saying he doesn't have power. I'm just saying he doesn't seem to be quite as big of a puncher as Anthony Yarde. But in terms of schooling, technical ability, accuracy, he seems to be a slight notch above Anthony Yarde. But of course, like any of these prospects, we all have to be weary. You often see people crowning these guys before they actually get to that point. I mean, it happens time and time again, where they're like, oh, he's definitely going to be a champion. He's definitely going to do that. You don't know. I mean, and this is why, I often recommend that we need to pump the brakes a little bit. Don't be so sure of yourself. With a lot of things in life. I mean, how many times do you get it wrong? And maybe it's human nature to just kind of fire and forget, where you don't count your losses. And it makes sense, especially if you put that in some like evolutionary role or something. But the fact is, in boxing, there are plenty of guys who look the part and never become the part. Francisco Bojada, I mean, that kid looked real damn good. He had good power, speed. His shots were technically good. I mean, he looked like he was going to be something special. And if I remember correctly, HBO was starting to peg him that, right? They were helping build the hype train. And then he had the early loss. And then Jesse James Leha put a kibosh pretty much on his entire career. And, so where's he at now? What about, Frankie Gomez? I mean, I'm not disrespecting his career choice now. I think he's, changing tires at, Jiffy Lube or something. And again, I'm not disrespecting what he's doing. I'm just saying he looked like the goods, didn't have the motivation, and now he's absent. He's no longer a product. And even if he picks it back up, you can't expect him to be, some dominating figure. I mean, the motivation is already not there enough for him to be, reach that level. Talent was there. But, Boatsy, Callum Johnson. Johnson is a big hitter, good fighter. It had a good account of himself versus, Artur Beterbiev. That's a good step-up fight. Let's make that happen. And there'd be a good 2020, right? If we get these fights I've already talked about, if we get them done, we got a good year to look forward to. Anyways, we'll move on to Vincent Fagan Boots because this is really the highlight of the night. I mean, Fagan Boots is a fantastic fighter. He's really one of those German guys that you don't pay attention to, but you just know that he's going to knock everybody out at 168. And no, I mean, listen, I've seen Fagan Boots. I actually followed him early in his career. I had some hope for him. I'm not a big fan of the German style, putting your gloves up, blocking shots, leading with jabs. The Arthur Abrahams, Felix Sturms, it just looks amateurish, and I don't think that's the best way to utilize somebody's ability. And Fagan Boots, I think, is hampered coming out of Germany and fighting out of that style. I really do, because he's a genuine puncher. At least he looks the part so far. I mean, he seems to have heavy hands, and I would say that maybe he's the biggest puncher at 168. I could be wrong. He's not doing it at the upper echelon of the division, but he just doesn't have the delivery system that other guys do. He doesn't have the accuracy. He doesn't have the speed. He's just kind of a slower puncher. It's a failure to maximize, what he is. He's a puncher, but you watch him fight and he's jabbing a lot. He's blocking a lot. I mean, really, some American should invite him over, teach him to move his head and fight, more like Joe Frazier or something. I mean, the guy can punch, but, again, the system, I think it's hampering him. I think it's doing no good. Anyways, he got a new trainer. I don't know what he expects to do against Caleb Plant. I think it's another poor defense by Caleb Plant. I mean, it's not that much of a step up from his last one. Plant should really whip this guy's ass. He's just too quick. I mean, Fagan Boots, the German guys are typically not good at following boxers, especially slick ones. And I just don't think... unless you're Henry Mask or, Darius Michalczewski, guys who had longer amateur backgrounds and fought against that style a bit more, they did okay, right? I mean, you watch the fights with Virgil Hill, they did okay, right? But Fagan Boots is not on that level. So I just think it's a big mismatch. I think he's going to stop Fagan Boots. If I'm not mistaken, Fagan Boots... I kind of like saying that name too, Fagan Boots. But I think Fagan Boots has already been stopped in what was a minor upset. He's just like he's a European level guy, and it's a big mismatch. He could hire any trainer that he wants. It's not going to get the job done. And plus you've got to to make some sort of radical change. I don't think it happens in one camp, at least not with his style and what appears to be his ring IQ. I don't know. But of course it is boxing. He is a puncher. You never know. He might clip Plant. He might get the job done. It's always possible, but it just appears like it's a big mismatch. Plant is going to box his ears off and stop him. Anyways, speaking of actually give me a second here. My mouth is kind of dry. It's hard doing this show solo. It sucks. I wish I had somebody to come on and chit-chat with, and hopefully next week. I'm trying to get this YouTube stuff up and running so that way I can be on a webcam, talking to my mic, have my headphones on. That way it's a little bit easier on me. And I think it would add a nice wrinkle to the show as well. And and we could interact. We could interact a bit more than we can. Actually, you can comment on Spreaker right now if you're listening, but I'm not accessing it right now because there are just so few comments there. Spreaker it's a good, if you're thinking about doing a podcast, it's pretty damn good. I like their features. You can modify colors and, whenever you share it to a page like Twitter, Facebook, it seems to do a good job of integrating hashtags and stuff like that, and the reach seems to be pretty good. So I do recommend Spreaker if you're just doing audio, but it's I would also like to do video because I don't think I'm an ugly dude, so I don't think you guys are going to have that hard of a time with it. But it's just a new wrinkle. I can interact, go the Michael Montero route at least a little bit, split them up. Some people just prefer audio, or maybe if, the video thing takes off, then I'll just stick with that. Anyway, speaking of a guy who has a new trainer, Jaime Munguia has a new coach in his camp, and that is Mexican legend Eric Morales. Yeah, there's really no use giving you a background on who Eric Morales is unless you're pretty new to the sport. I mean, if you didn't watch him, if you're a bit younger, maybe, hell, man, it's crazy how fast time flies. But if you're, in your early 20s or you're a teenager or whatnot, Eric Morales was an excellent 122-pounder. I would say one of the best ever. He was an excellent featherweight as well, and he was able to, be serviceable. Actually, he was pretty good up until 140 pounds. If I'm not mistaken, he gave Danny Garcia a good run in their first fight, and then he got knocked out in dramatic fashion in the second one. But he was good. He was a legend. If you included him in your top 10, Mexicans of all time, I wouldn't be mad at you. It just depends on how you dice up the resumes and the skills of, the contemporaries. Do you prefer Morales or do you prefer Barrera? Do you prefer Marquez? I will say, maybe I'm going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit with this, but the thing about Morales is he actually seems to come in third place when people are talking about Marquez and Barrera, and I think it does make sense on the surface. You look at Marquez, and he had 4 fights with Pacquiao. There are a good number of people who think he won the series with Manny Pacquiao. He knocked Manny Pacquiao out. That was huge. Knockout of the decade. And then you had, his fights with Marco Antonio Barrera, and he was, 1 and 2 in those fights. But of course, again, all these things are about context, and it's worth looking at, especially in boxing. Boxing, you don't have as quantifiable statistics as you do in other sports. So, like when you're watching a fight and you watch a partial punch land, it's on the it's really the user's assessment of how effective that punch was to kind of integrate it into the whole, right? So like, how does that play into the whole of the round? It's a tough thing. Anyways, when you break down Morales' career, yeah, he fell short in the Barrera fights, though they were all damn close. But he also beat Manny Pacquiao. Nearest to Manny Pacquiao's best. He did it, he did it better than Marquez or Barrera. Again, Marquez did end up getting the knockout, and that was the most emphatic, right? That felt like the exclamation point on the series. But Pacquiao was years past his best there. I know he's still ticking and he's still damn good, but when Morales did it in the first fight, Pacquiao was closest to his prime. He was closer to the peak of his powers. And Barrera just couldn't handle Pacquiao no matter what. He was better in the rematch, but it was still a runaway decision in Pacquiao's favor. Anyways, and you see Morales, he was better against some of the guys that he was better than some of the guys Barrera fell to. But yeah, of course. Anyways, I don't want to get into all that. So Morales is apparently in Jaime Munguia's camp. Munguia is moving up to 160 pounds. He's fighting Spike O'Sullivan in, a kind of, let's dip our toes in the division and see what he's got. I'm not surprised at all. Jaime Munguia was real big at 154. And, I would have really liked to see that guy take some drug tests. I'm not accusing him of using steroids or any of that. But if we're talking about weight cutting supplements, clenbuterol or something like that, yeah. He looks real big, and he was kind of a weight bully there. So, at 160, I think he's gonna be fine. He's gonna be pretty much what he was at 154. I don't think there's much difference between 154 pounders and 160 pounders anyway. So, to me, the difference is, there's nothing there. So he's going to fight Spike O'Sullivan, who got beat up real bad by Dave Lemieux. Can Jaime Munguia replicate that performance? No, I don't think so. He could, of course. I don't want to speak in certainties, but I just don't. He doesn't have that power. But of course, if he comes out and he clips him, and he could get him out there in the first round. I just don't think it'll be as devastating as the performance David Lemieux put on. But it's a decent first fight at 160. I don't really think he needs this fight anyways. I mean, I just don't think there's any real need to transition from 154 to 160 as if, right, you're trying to get comfortable with things. But I think the ultimate plan is, and I've talked about this for, years now, especially when the chinks in the armor started to show for Jaime Munguia. I think you just saw in Golden Boy's eyes, they're like, well, we got to get paid now. I mean, we got to, before he gets upset by somebody like Dennis Hogan. I mean, because how long can they keep? And I'm not calling the Hogan fight a robbery. I'm not saying that, but you can tell that he's getting some preferential treatment. And so it seems like, with his performances of late, you're like, he can't keep doing this. He's going to get upset by somebody that Golden Boy does not want him to. And, so you play kind of safe until you get probably Canelo Alvarez. I mean, that is what I think they've been targeting for years now. It would be huge. I mean, Canelo has said that he doesn't want to fight, and there's some tribalism involved there because the Mexican doesn't want to fight the Mexican. I think that's pretty much what he said, but it would do big bucks. I don't know if they would stage that in Mexico City or whatnot, but it sells well. It really does. You put that on, Mexican Independence Weekend, and they're rolling in the dough there. So I think ultimately that's what the plan is. Maybe they get him to, maybe they have a soft touch here, soft touch again. I don't know. I don't know exactly how long they're going to want to play this out. But it just doesn't seem as if Munguia, I mean, who would he fight otherwise? The goal for these guys is to win an alphabet trinket. And who's he going to fight? He's going to fight Gennady Golovkin for his trinket. Maybe. I don't see why Golden Boy would want to offer that up. But then again, they're all under the DAZN umbrella. So again, maybe. It just seems like if you're going to cash him out because of this, you put him in against Canelo Alvarez. Right? I mean, the WBC, they would make Munguia the number one guy, at the drop of a hat. Anyways, he's got Morales in his corner. If Munguia looks improved in this fight against Spike O'Sullivan, some people say, yeah, it was Morales. I don't think there's much. I mean, Munguia just doesn't strike me as a smart fighter. He doesn't seem malleable, at least not much. Against Spike O'Sullivan, maybe you'll see some new stuff, kind of like Golovkin and Banks, right? You looked at him hitting the pads and he was moving his head. He looked a bit fluid, and then when the fight started, there was a little bit of that against Derevyanchenko in the early going, and then he just kind of reverted back to his old style. Munguia, to me, strikes me as one of those guys. I mean, I've seen plenty of guys like that in my day, and it just seems like ultimately, if you get him in a little bit of firefight, he's just going to try to pound you. He's going to do what he's always done. So I just don't think there's much we're going to learn from a fight against Spike O'Sullivan. Unless Spike O'Sullivan knocks him out or something, I guess we'll learn a little bit something there. But if Munguia looks like he has new wrinkles and then bowls him over, I just, be cautious with that. And then last, but of course not least, actually this is what the picture is, for the show, and I wanted to do so because I know a lot of people are not honoring the guy. There's not going to be a lot of chatter about it, but he deserves some praise, and that is Denis Lebedev. If I'm not mistaken, he has announced his retirement, and it's kind of like Carlos De Leon dying. I'm hoping I could have Mike on or somebody else who knew De Leon a little bit better than I did, but it's two cruiserweights, right? And Lebedev fought in cruiserweights, I think, pretty much his entire career, if I'm not mistaken. No, I actually think he started off as a light heavyweight, and then he fought a bunch of his career at the vast majority of his career at cruiserweight. Again, I'm not looking, so I don't know, but I believe that's how it played out. But, cruiserweight, just like Carlos De Leon, it's not a glamorous division. Heavyweight is where the money is at. That's where people like to compete. Plenty of guys have made the jump and fallen because of it. But Lebedev is one of the best 100 and one of the best cruiserweights to put on gloves. I mean, I'm not calling him number 1 or 2 or 3. That's for guys who know the division a bit better than I do. And I would say that I do know the class better than a lot of Americans. I have followed it. I mean, I've been following, not real close, but I mean, about since Steve Cunningham. Again, I'm not that old. But it's just not a glamorous division. And Lebedev is one of the best practitioners to do it. I mean, and you saw, some of the fights. Of course, he's probably going to be best remembered for that butt whipping he took against what was the Guillermo Jones? Yes, that's the one. And I think Jones tested positive for a PED, but that's what Lebedev is best known for. That shellacking that he took, his puffy face. I mean, you just don't see stuff like that regularly. But when you evaluate his record, Jones was a damn good fighter, and he did beat guys like Macaronelli, who was pretty good. He did lose a split decision to Marco Huck, which I think I've seen the fight, but it's been many years since I've done so. Of course, I think that was in Germany. So if Lebedev lost a split decision in Germany, it probably tells me that he won. And then he beat up a few old Americans like Roy Jones Jr., which the stoppage was pretty bad, actually. I mean, Roy was chasing an alphabet trinket at cruiserweight. That was something that he missed during his prime. He wanted to make up for lost time, and he just ended up getting knocked out pretty badly in the 10th round. And then he beat James Toney as well. And then he fought a few other guys. Let me see. Let me make sure I got this right. And then he beat guys like Latif Coyote. It's all right. And then Ramirez. And then I think he showed his level, that he was a world-class operator for much of his career. And I think he's friends with Alexander Povetkin. And I think there's some similarities in their career. I mean, if you look at the rankings, Lebedev was ranked in the top 10 for a long time, and he was also ranked in the top 5 for a long time. And that's kind of like what Povetkin's career has been like. I mean, Povetkin, I think, has been ranked, now that it's 2020, I think he's been ranked, 12? He's been ranked in the top 10 12 of the last 13 years. I believe it is, or 13 of the last 14, which is a real impressive stuff. And then he's been ranked in the top 5 for like 8 or 9 of those, something like that. And Lebedev is similar in that regard, in that he's been in the top 10 for many years. He's been in the top 5 for a good amount of years as well, but he's never really established himself as a dominant force. He's never really been that guy. But again, you can see what level this guy is on. He had a real close fight with Murat Gassiev, and I think that was a split decision, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's near his prime, and Lebedev, who's clearly past his best, and he's given the young gun, much of what he can handle. It was a good fight. Interesting because, 2 Russians. Of course, I think Murat Gassiev is ethnically Turkish. So there's some like subtle differences there. But yeah, I mean, Lebedev was obviously a world-class practitioner in a class that doesn't get the glitz and glamour of other classes, but he deserves his due. I mean, if you were to put yourself in his position. I mean, if you had carved out a career like that, would you not be satisfied? I sure as hell would be. I mean, it's a difficult thing to even get out of the amateurs and be a good pro. It's difficult to be a good amateur. And this is one thing that's worth putting into perspective too. It's hard to be a good amateur, let alone a good pro. And when you make that transition, I've seen guys in Colorado, where I'm from, who are, like Golden Gloves winners in the open class, and then they get into the professional ranks and they're losing to, guys you wouldn't even classify as journeymen. I mean, maybe local, you would say like regional journeymen. It happens. It's tough, man. It's a tough game. I mean, it's hard to excel at. It's not a natural thing. Maybe to want to punch somebody in the face, maybe it is, right? I mean, fighting is certainly natural. I think that's why we, humans have an affinity towards it. It's because it is. But it's like being calm in the face of danger and doing some of these things that guys like, Lomachenko and Crawford and, Canelo and Golovkin and Gonzalez and Estrada, so many of these other guys are able to do in the face of danger is a big reason why we tune in. But again, it's tough. I mean, like there was a local guy, Donald Camarena here, who, good fighter. I watched some of his stuff. They would play it on Altitude Sports. I thought he was a good fighter. I was at the same gym as him. Not really, again, I wasn't training to be a pro or anything, but I was in the gym. He trained me a little bit. He would do well at the local and regional level, and then when he stepped up to guys like Tim Bradley and Paulie Malignaggi, he couldn't cope. But again, if if there's 1,300 guys in your division and you get ranked inside the top 500, you're actually doing pretty well for yourself, right? To get in the top 400, it's a bit harder, 300, right? And on and on and on. So, when you start labeling guys that are in the top 20, 30 bums, to me, it just doesn't register. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's tough to obtain that level. And again, if that was your career, I think you would be perfectly fine with it. I don't think you'd be wanting people to call you a bum either. Lebedev was obviously a notch better than this. He was a world-class operator, right? He never made his mark as the very best in the division, but he was very good. And for that, he needs to be commended. And, and plus he looks cool. I mean, he looks like a Russian sailor who would get in knife fights on a boat or something. I mean, he just looks cool. He looks like a character you would draw up and put in a movie, and he'd be the bad guy, right? Like you'd put him in an old Bond film, with Pierce Brosnan or something, and he would be, picking food out of his teeth with a knife or something. I mean, he looks like that kind of character. But again, I don't know much about his personal life. He just has that look. You know what I mean? So yeah, he's done a good job. He deserves credit. He did well for himself. I wish I would have seen him fight some of the better guys. I mean, Huck obviously was a damn good cruiserweight himself. But there were some missing years there where he probably could have fought better opposition. Tried to maximize his potential a little bit more, but he did a good job. Good on him. I wish him well in retirement. And with that, I'm going to wish you guys well in retirement for the night or the day. I don't know, maybe it's early where you're at, but for me, it's a bit late, and I'm going to wrap it up because of that. So for Jeremiah Preisser, you've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.